down Lorenzo Road to Arsenal. And the inbound Stevenson is tight, Central Avenue to Cicero. Inbound Bishop Ford tight, approaching the Verge. It's traffic. I'm Jim Calamonte on AM 560 The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next in our 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center. A cooler day ahead, rain and drizzle. Breezy this afternoon, high 55, and a high wave warning kicks up on Lake Michigan overnight. 54 right now. Next news, 7:30. Breaking news as it happens. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Very interesting how Florida is doing compared to Illinois after Lightfoot triple threat. Our illustrious mayor was just beside herself that the beaches in Florida would be reopened last week when they were.
Yeah, none of her business. She's so
God
angry.
help us.
She's still driving around in that black SUV with her security detail, yelling at people. She's so angry. You know what? She should practice what she preaches. Go home. Be with your wife and your daughter. We're locked inside. Why aren't you?
God help us is what she said.
Yep.
Here's Governor DeSantis explaining why Florida has been so successful where few other states have, and certainly more successful than every state has, every state with any significant outbreak, and that is protecting the most of the most vulnerable, protecting the most vulnerable among that category, people in long-term care facilities.
Well, thanks, Sean. We really focused because we knew where the threat was and we knew where the vulnerabilities were. And so when you're talking about putting out 7 million masks and gloves and face shields, making sure that we have teams going there to try to see where the infections are coming from, try to work on keeping those at bay, sending National Guard units in to do spot testing in those facilities, that is all a recognition that if the virus gets into those facilities, it can run rampant. And so we've worked really hard to do that. I got a great Secretary for Healthcare Administration, Mary Mayhew, which is really spearheaded. She was fighting the whole time. She wouldn't let a hospital put a sick COVID patient back in a nursing home. She said, you guys got to keep these folks because then they'll infect the rest of the nursing home. So it's a very difficult problem, but I think because we were proactive, we've had much better results and a much lower death rate than we otherwise would.
And that's opposite of what Cuomo did, too. I mean, he put the sick patients back in the nursing homes and the long-term care facilities.
That's right. And Governor DeSantis did not have to close golf courses in order to protect those in long-term care facilities. Remarkable. The fatality rate in Florida,
yes,
among long-term care residents, 1.2%. In New Jersey, 23%. In New York, 18%. In Massachusetts, 18%.
Oh, 18.
In Connecticut, 11%. In Louisiana, 10%. In Pennsylvania, 7%. In Colorado, another state that, unbeknownst to the D.C. press corps, has also reopened with the Democratic governor,
yeah.
4%. And remember, I'm talking about just the fatality rate as a percentage of the overall number of residents in these long-term care facilities. And, of course, Florida has many more than most of those states. The percentage of deaths that are accounted for by residents of long-term care facilities, 35% of all deaths in Illinois, more than 50% of all deaths in Massachusetts, more than 20% nationally, and I suggest that's probably a low number, but just take it as is, and 1.2% fatality rate among that very vulnerable population in Florida. And he didn't have to arrest fathers for playing t-ball in a park with daughters.
Right.
And he didn't have to stop people from playing golf or otherwise enjoying the outside in the Sunshine State. Remarkable. He tread lightly on people's rights and was still able to protect the most vulnerable. And what did he receive for it? Criticism from the beginning, acting too slowly, to the end, opening the beaches. For more on this, the civil rights and liberties piece of it, Pleased to be joined again by our friend Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney, contributing editor at National Review, author of Ball of Collusion, bestseller, Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Andy, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. It's my pleasure. You know, when you were saying all that, I was mindful of, I have friends down in Florida, and what they've been astonished by is the difference in the perception of DeSantis in the state, where he's very popular and was thought to be doing the right thing across the board, versus nationally, particularly the take on by the national media in the Northeast. It's like night and day. But I agree with you. He's done a superb job.
Well, it's funny too. Ron DeSantis has done a good job, and he is a whipping boy for the D.C. press corps. The worst outbreak in the country is New York State, and Andrew Cuomo is America's governor.
Yeah, right. Just don't let him, run your health care facility for the elderly. That's probably not a great idea. Look, it's the media. It's who they are. It's the same media that doesn't ask, Joe Biden about the Tara Reid question. They're just an adjunct of the Democratic Party, and it is what it is, and you just have to sort of accept it and roll with it because it's not going to change.
Soldier on, right. So with respect to Attorney General Barr, speaking of the media's interpretation of some remarks he's given and instruction he's given over the last week or so about keep an eye out for obvious abuses of people's constitutional rights by state and local governments. This is fascinating. All these ACLU members are receiving this as some sort of authoritarian intrusion by the Attorney General to protect constitutional rights at the local level. It's such a mind bender.
Yeah, you'd almost think that the people of the United States were the sovereign rather than these governors.
Crazy talk.
The craziest of the crazy talk, and in all seriousness, I think the most trenchant thing he says, because I noticed that when people hear this, they say, "Oh yeah, that's right," but his point was that it's not your burden to show that your job is essential versus non-essential. It's their burden, that is the state's burden, to show that your job can't be operated safely under any conditions or safety restrictions. In other words, from the very beginning here, we have had the balance entirely wrong and the burden of proof entirely wrong. It's always on the state. Even if we accept this is like a two-part test that asks, do they have a compelling interest in regulating, and are they using the least restrictive means to accomplish that? Let's give them the first one, because everybody understands that the spread of an infectious disease is preventing it is a compelling government interest. They still have to regulate when they're regulating your fundamental rights, whether it's your right to make a living, your property, association, free exercise of religion, and the like. They have to regulate with the least restrictive means that allows them to attempt to accomplish their legitimate aim, but at the same time understands that that is the American people are the sovereign. Government is created to protect their rights, not to restrict them, and they have to try to accomplish their objective with the maximum amount of indulgence to your fundamental rights. You don't have to accommodate your rights to them. That's not the way this is supposed to work as a matter of what the presumptions are.
And how can anything not be political? I mean, you have lawmakers who have cousins who are invested in pot shops here in Illinois. That's an essential item, but yet they tell you don't smoke because then you could die easier from COVID-19.
Yeah, Amy, this is the issue, I think, that is a lot more important than what the law says. We could talk all day about, what the Supreme Court's jurisprudence about fundamental rights is and what the legal tests are and how they weigh it and all that stuff. But the bottom line is, if you took all the police agencies of all of the government entities that we have in this country, federal, state, municipal, and you combine them, they could not enforce shelter in place and other lockdown restrictions against 330 million Americans. If you don't have public buy-in to what the states are trying to do, you will have revolt in the street and anarchy because they simply can't enforce what they're trying to enforce. So they have to go about this with the understanding that they can't politicize it. They can't use a crisis as a pretext for trying to advance a political agenda. They can't be discriminatory about the way they enforce things. They can't say that you can go through a drive-through restaurant, but you can't go to a drive-in religious service that respects social distancing and other things that are necessary at this time. If they enforce it in a politicized way or a discriminatory way, they're going to lose their legitimacy. And once the police lose their legitimacy in the sense that people think that they're so arbitrary and capricious they don't have to follow the rules, then you have complete chaos because then the police can't do what they need to do.
Speaking of lost legitimacy, that's a perfect segue to the FBI and to the Mueller investigative team. The General Flynn matter, the president tweeted out recently that he's considering a full pardon of General Flynn. May not be necessary, according to reports out earlier in this week, suggesting that new filings by federal prosecutors contain exculpatory evidence with respect to General Flynn.
Yeah, I think the thing with the pardon is Flynn would probably, as a last resort, obviously I think they'd take it, but Flynn would rather be exonerated by the prosecutors, by the Justice Department, than get a pardon. And there were pretty explosive revelations, assuming that Sidney Powell, who's really been persistent on this for months, if she summarized them correctly in the motion that she filed on Friday, and I don't mean to suggest she didn't, I don't think there's any reason to think she didn't, there's indication that the Justice Department had exculpatory evidence that they didn't turn over to the first set of lawyers for General Flynn, that first set of lawyers for General Flynn didn't do a particularly good job representing him, and that there may have been a secret deal where, Flynn's camp all along has said that the reason he pled guilty, even though he says he isn't guilty, and the agents who interviewed him didn't think he lied to them, was because the Mueller team threatened to prosecute his son if he didn't plead guilty. There's now a paper trail that shows that there was a deal that the Justice Department didn't want to write into or that the Mueller team didn't want to write into the plea agreement, that if Flynn pled guilty, his son would not be prosecuted. And if that happened, that's a big problem because under federal law, when you plead guilty, the entirety of the understandings that go to the plea have to be disclosed to the court that is taking the plea. So that's one big problem. And secondly, the only rational reason to keep that kind of a commitment under wraps would be that they plan to use Flynn as a witness but not disclose that commitment existed, which would be a violation of their discovery obligations in other cases. So it's if that happened, it's a real serious bit of misconduct.
In addition to the possibility, if that happened, Flynn would be exonerated. This is the question that everybody wants to know. Anytime anything related to the Mueller investigation comes up, what will be the consequences for the bad actors in this instance, if there are bad actors?
Yeah, and I think the only thing that we can say about that at the moment is that this is being looked at very seriously as a criminal investigation. Durham in outside the Bell, Connecticut, to look at. He's treated it as a criminal investigation. In connection with Flynn, he brought in Jeff Jensen, another fine U.S. attorney from outside Washington, to look at that case. And already we're seeing the results of that in these very, very late in the day disclosures we're seeing. So I think let's take it a step at a time and recognize that the Justice Department is looking at this carefully, and they're bringing people in who won't be influenced by the usual nonsense in Washington to take a hard look at it.
He is Andy McCarthy, Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review, author of the bestseller Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency, which persists, I should add. Andy McCarthy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Have a great day. Stay
care.
safe.
Thanks, you too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer